Education 406, this is a video for a combined weeks 2 and 3. So, as mentioned in the video specific to your syllabus, weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all going to be due Sunday at 11:59 at the end of that fourth week. So, we'll take a look at the syllabus and see what we have on tap for weeks 2 and 3. So as we dig into this, I know that sometimes it's a little bit tough to manage time when we have a big window, and so I do have the syllabus structured weekly. So I would recommend turning everything in Sundays at 11:59 for the week that they are originally scheduled for. But it's up to you in that they won't be considered late until we get to Sunday of week 4, until after that deadline. Okay, so let's start with week 2. If we just look at our bullet point student learning outcomes for the week, so you guys are going to justify using picture books to support reading comprehension and instruction, analyze the process of gradual release of responsibility with regard to reading instruction, analyze integrating technology into reading comprehension, including differentiation, identify ways to assess reading for elementary classrooms, identify strategies to support students choosing good fit books, and then reflect on your personal experience or field experience as you work to build literate communities in your elementary reading classrooms. So that's a lot for week 2. We are going to do that through, all of that is contained within the content of chapter 4 and 5. There's very meaty chapters that have a lot of critical information as we start to move forward with what are the essential pieces of reading comprehension instruction in elementary classrooms. So this week you'll have a discussion board, some interactive notebook work, you'll be developing an anchor chart, and you'll be reading your strategies that work chapters 4 and 5. So if we go back to our weekly content, you will see your week's content through week 3. Let's focus on week 2 right now. So here is your discussion board post. Chapter 5 speaks to setting the tone for building a literate community in a classroom. So I want you to take a moment, reflect on if you're in a classroom right now as a TA or as a teacher or in some fashion. Or if you're placed in a classroom for a field experience, you can use that classroom for this as well. Or if you're not in a classroom, you don't have a field experience, I want you to reflect back on your personal experience in an elementary classroom as a student. So there's some lens that you can put to this, no matter what situation you're in. So in chapter 5, it speaks of 9 principles to guide teachers in setting a strong tone for literate classroom communities. In looking at those 9, what things did you notice, or what did you notice in your classrooms, or if you're reflecting on your experience as an elementary student, in your reflections, what do you notice? So choose at least 3 of those 9 principles to speak to. Provide evidence of how your room or experience is or is not evidence of these effective principles. So pick 3 of those 9 and decide, my classroom does or did have this, or my classroom did not or doesn't have this, and just speak to that. So it doesn't have this because we didn't have these in my classroom, or it does have this because this is an expectation in my classroom. So choose 3 of those 9 to speak to. Remember that you will post, and then you'll also reply to 2 of your peers or colleagues' posts as well. So that's your discussion board to kind of get us off to the start. Then let's go into your interactive notebook, which is aligned with your strategies that work, chapters 4 and 5. Now remember, when you need to go into your interactive notebook, you'll always go into week 1 and always go into your interactive notebook link. This will take you into the original, and then you will go down to your week. You will need to copy, pardon me, scrolling quickly, randomly, it's going the wrong way. Okay, you will need to copy the table of contents. I'm so sorry, it's all kind of wonky while it's scrolling. So this is a completed table of contents for the entire term. So you can go ahead and copy this table of contents and paste it into your interactive notebook. The only thing that you will be doing is adding in these page numbers as we go along. And then I will be going in and adding your points earned each week or at midterm whenever you turn it in. So that is a complete table of contents though. Here are the questions that you answered for week 1. Now we're going to go into week 2. So in chapters 4 and 5, we talk about reading in the 21st century. I want you to identify and define in your own words the 6 principles shared to enrich comprehension instruction with technology. In what ways can you differentiate instruction for students using technology? So these are pulled directly from the textbook and from the chapter, but I really want this in your own words. I don't want you to just copy and paste from the book. This interactive notebook and your notes should be a tool for you as you become a classroom teacher to remember some critical things as you begin to set up your practices. In regard to picture books, in what 3 ways do or can picture books enrich reading comprehension instruction? How can they use to be differentiation tools? Good fit books. I'm going to come back to that in just a second because that's where our anchor chart comes in. Gradual release of responsibility. I want you to identify and define in your own words the steps within that process of the gradual release of responsibility and why is that a best practice with reading instruction? Why should we have gradual release of responsibility in our classrooms? And then assessing comprehension. So authentic assessment provides us critical information of what 3 areas. Explain those areas and how assessments within those areas does impact planning and instruction. So those are pieces, these top 2 and these bottom 2 are pieces that you're going to pull content from the chapter and you're going to speak to it in your own words. If it's asking you to identify and define, make sure that you're doing that. You are not just kind of regurgitating information from the chapter and from the textbook. You're going to list or bullet or however is fine. Now, let's look at choosing good fit books. So the section in chapter 4 that's titled Helping Kids Select Books to Read is about helping kids find good fit books. And after you read chapter 4, I want you to do a little bit of research. This doesn't have to be extensive. Just type in Google good fit books. And it should lead you to supporting resources in your for you to use in your future classroom. So it should take you to things that you can use to build up your toolbox, but also to complete this task. So I want you to take what you know from this part of chapter 4, the helping kids to select books to read, and what you know and what you find about good fit books. Take those 2 sources of information to design an anchor chart. Now, if you go back into week 2, you will see that there is a very brief video for an anchor chart. So I want you to make sure that you navigate to this before you create your anchor chart. It's like a 2.5, 3-minute video that explains what an anchor chart is, gives you some examples. Hopefully you've seen these in classrooms, but if not, please make sure that you do read this. So after you have read both sections, or that read the section of the book, you've done a little bit of research about good fit books, and you've watched that video, you're going to design an anchor chart that will support students to be able to pick a good fit book. You can create it on an anchor chart, like on a piece of sticky chart paper, and you can take a picture of it and upload it right here where it says answer here, or you can do it digitally. It could be something that you create and save as an image that you can upload here as well. But either way, you're going to upload the image right here. It just, if you want to do it on paper and then take a picture of it, or if you want to do it digitally and insert it there, that's fine. So those are your tasks for week 2. So again, most of it is kind of just pulling key pieces of information from the text and from the reading and putting it into your notebook. But this is actually something that I want you to apply what you're learning about good fit books to be able to design an anchor chart. Okay? And once we do that, that completes all of your tasks for that week, for week 2. Now for this coming week, you are going to design an anchor chart for 7 best practices of reading comprehension, identify and justify best practices for students responding to reading, Identify and define best assessment practices in responding to reading, and reflect on 8 strategic lessons that are specific to students monitoring comprehension. And you'll do those through your discussion board, interactive notebook, your anchor chart, and then chapters 6 and 7 in your strategies that work. So again, let's go now to week 3. And in week 3, you will see your discussion board, and that's the only thing that's in there right now, just because everything else is going to be in your interactive notebook. So please take a minute in your discussion board to think about how important it is to provide opportunities for students to respond to reading. It is critical that students are making connections and responding to the reading that they're doing so that they're comprehending what they're reading. The more engaging those experiences are, the more likely they are to remember the book, to remember the experience, and the whole thing. There are 13 ways in your reading for the week that the authors share to teach students to respond to reading. I want you to pick one oral and one written or artistic or digital response method, and I want you to share to these prompts. So first one is kind of not specific to one that you're going to choose, but in your experience, was this method implemented effectively, and how do you know? So if you're choosing an oral and then a written, artistic, digital, so you'll have 2 total, was that something that was implemented effectively in your experience, either as a classroom teacher now, a TA now, or in your classroom when you were an elementary student? Which method would you choose to implement in your classroom and why? And what are some potential challenges that you may need to prepare for? So, we receive this information from the textbook and from our research as best practices, but we also know that there are some realities in the classroom that may be a struggle as we roll out these strategies. So what do you foresee some of those strategies being? So that is your discussion board for this week. Now let's dig into your interactive notebook for week 3. So it's a little less than week 2, but it's because you're designing more with regard to your anchor charts. So let's first look at this responding to reading. So this connects to your discussion board in that you are just going to identify and define the 13 options for responding to reading. Bullet points are acceptable. You're just going to bullet those 13 items and give me a little definition in your own words. Then what I want you to do, there are instructional practices for reading comprehension. So chapter 6 has 7 practices for reading comprehension. Each of those is listed at the beginning of the chapter, but then each of those instructional practices is dug into a little bit deeper so that we can see some best practices and pieces of why that works and what things make it work and what we need to remember, some key points to those. So for each of those 7, I want you to design an anchor chart based on the brief explanation that's in the beginning of the chapter, as well as that page that's more specific. Use both of those pieces of the chapter to design your anchor chart. You can create it on chart paper again, or you can do it digitally. It's up to you. I will say that because there's so many, I'm fine if you want to do 2 on an anchor chart. So if you want to split the anchor chart in half and have like strategy 1 and 2, and then have strategy 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and then 7. You can do it either way is fine. And then something that this book is a great resource for are your strategy lessons. So there are several chapters in the middle of the textbook that actually provide you lessons. And this chapter speaks to monitoring comprehension. So there are 8 strategy lessons about monitoring comprehension. For each of those lessons, I want you here in this answer space to list, you can do it in an outline format if you want to. I want to see the title, the purpose, the audience, and then I want you to summarize what that lesson's about. The hope is that as you are building this interactive notebook and adding these notes about your strategy lessons, you can go back to this notebook as you become a classroom teacher and you can pull out these resources and remember what they are and go back to the textbook to pull out the full lesson. So that is what you're working on in week 3. So that will satisfy your discussion board, your notebook, your anchor chart, and your chapters read 6 and 7. So that's a lot of work to do in a couple of weeks. It's 2 weeks worth of work, so please know that I understand that. This work is not going to be due until the end of week 4, so it will be the end of this first week of April. Please email me with any questions and review this video if you think you've missed anything for your work.